Stop.
Great.
Great. Okay. So we're talking about a sociological perspective on police work, on policing, and this is my very bad English. I'm sorry for that, but I think it's I think everybody understands. And this is for our international friends, especially from the United States, for Science Institute, Brian Willis, Jonathan Wendler from Polish Solutions, where also Brian Lender has made a beautiful dissertation we talked about breeding, soldier and breeding. And today I'm talking with Laura about her dissertation, with also the subject of a biological narrative, if I'm correct. And can you just give a little teaser about this research? What did you
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So part of my dissertation, which is about being in control in police work, I analyzed how police officers talk about their embodied sensations, how they verbalize what they experience physically, and also how they attribute meaning to what civilians actually experience physically. And I found that the use of neurobiological narratives is very dominant, or at least is used very often by police officers. So the use of neurobiological narratives is very wide and broadly applicable. So it happens in media, in schools, in professions more and more often. But police officers also do this. And with that, they attribute meaning to what happens to their bodies, and they learn about how their bodies work. And I analyzed why they used these narratives. And one of the reasons was that they use it as a facilitator of their action. So in their view, it helps them to become more strong, for instance. So these narratives about the body experiencing adrenaline actually helps them. And it also helps to attribute meaning to their professionalism and giving them a sense of agency, actually. But on the other hand, they use it as an explanation for action. So they tend to say that hormonal processes, again, adrenaline, is actually an explanation for why they couldn't control their strength, for instance, why they maybe squeezed a little bit harder than they initially wanted to. And so they sometimes separate their bodies from their selves in that sense. And so there's a bit of a risk in using these neurobiological narratives, but neurobiological concepts also teach them how to deal with stress. And so, it also adds to their bodily and emotional literacy in that sense.
So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a double-edged sword. Yeah, so it gives them agency, but also maybe is a challenge to self-control in that sense. So it gives them a sense of self-control, but it also challenges a sense of self-control.
And the title of this paper from your dissertation was I hope I say it correctly, but Primordial Brains and Bodies: How Neurobiological Discourses Shape Policing. How do you say that? Policing experiences. So one more time, I'll try to do it correctly. Primordial Brains and Bodies: How Neurobiological Discourses Shape Policing Experiences. Well, how important is discourse, and how important are narratives from your perspective? What are they?
Yeah, so narratives are really important. I mean, the neurobiological narrative, that's just one part of the many, many, many police narratives that are out there. So narratives and discourses are a way of talking about things in general, in this case, a way of talking about bodies. But there's also a lot of humor narratives, for instance, inherent in the policing job, of course. So this is just one narrative that I try to shed light on. But what I try to show is that through these narratives, police officers attribute meaning to their bodies and to how they experience the world. So narratives are really important for how they see the world, how they see behaviors of civilians, how they see themselves. And in this way, they shape experiences of police officers, how they approach situations, how they approach themselves, how they see concepts as self-control, stress management, how they approach teamwork, for instance. So it affects a lot of aspects of police work and sense making.
So can you say that we as police trainers, as first responder trainers, that words do matter, language does matter?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
I would definitely say so. Yeah, because in training, police officers begin to see the world through the eyes of becoming and being a police officer. So training and what is taught there through words is hugely important for how they well, embody this knowledge in the end. They embody this type of knowledge that is taught to them. For instance, about you will experience adrenaline when you're in high stress situations or high pressure situations. So it does shape their perspectives and perceptions. So hugely, it affects their sense making and their work, I would say.
so we as trainers should be wise in choosing our words and language. Is that what we can say? So
Yeah,
without becoming paranoid, yeah, of course.
yeah. Don't become paranoid. No. Yeah, it's hugely important. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not happening now, but as trainers, you really add to this literacy of what police officers know and how they can interpret their experiences and interpret situations and interpret behavior of civilians and of themselves.
Yes.
How they should work together. And I mean, the things that they are taught, how you speak about them is really important. So yes, choosing carefully. I mean, that's not to say that doesn't happen now. I think
of course. Yeah.
Very, very aware of how
Yeah.
they teach police officers the things that they are teaching.
So at a later time, we unpack the article. What did you research, and why did you do it, and what did you find? But just for this moment, I'm curious about. You are a sociolog. Please, sociolog. What is it in English?
Sociologist.
Sociologist. Okay. And maybe for the police trainers, what is the major difference from that perspective for, let's say, a neuroscientific perspective, or a psychological perspective, or a law and justice perspective? What is this sociological perspective looks like? Why is it important?
Yeah, that's a big question. But so the sociological perspective is often about how people attribute meaning to themselves and to the world, and how they live and experience and embody this world. So it's always about how people relate to the world that they're in, how people relate to one another. So in a way, it's a rather holistic approach, I would say. And I feel, or I think it's important to look from a sociological perspective, because there are so many factors always inherent in how people live and how people experience themselves in situations, and just the things that they do. So sociology can really shed light on the hows and the whys of what people do. I mean, there's many police sociologists in the US, so there's probably someone else that can talk about this better than me even. But I feel sociology really tries to take into account multiple ways of looking at how people attribute meaning to it. So for instance, they could do an analysis of how law looks at it, of how neurobiology or neuroscientific sciences look at it, and really weigh how these factors relate to one another, for instance.
And you make a nice how do you call it, connection, if I'm right, between, so you do from the sociology perspective, but also focusing on a very biological thing, namely the body.
Yeah.
So is here we are in a sort of cross point of
trying to so what I did in this analysis for this paper, I tried to kind of venture into affect studies and embodiment studies, and actually to say something about mind-body relationships. And these mind-body relationships, well, in this case, officers do this through discourse and through narratives and very much neurobiological. So by analyzing how they use these neurobiological narratives and why they use them, you can really try to say something about concepts such as self-control, about how they see mind-body relationships and their selves, and issues of accountability and legitimacy, how it relates to how they take ownership for what they do. So it's, very much body studies, neurobiology, and then a sociological perspective on it.
Great. Well, at a later moment we unpack the study. So for now, thank you for this first introduction. And I think many of my American colleagues, especially those with their own podcast, I think they would love also this perspective. And as we